Are you tired of watching shows that only give you general social media theory and expect you to figure out how to apply it to your own industry? Join us for this week's episode of Social Chatter, the industry's longest-running social media marketing news talk show. Not only will you learn the latest breaking news, but you'll also gain practical advice on how to apply it. Now here's your host, Christian Karasevich.
Welcome everyone to Social Chatter, your weekly social media marketing news talk show. This is episode 234 with myself, Jim Fuhs, and this week's guest is Chris Stone. And you're in for a treat. We're going to not only talk about what's new in social media this week from LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, Pinterest, and much more, but Chris is also going to share some fantastic tips for those of you looking to tap into live streaming and podcasting. So be sure you stay tuned in for the entire show. But I'm going to go and bring on Jim so we can kick things off. We have quite a few topics this week. We're going to do our best to get to all of the best ones that we can and make sure we give Chris enough time. So Jim, how you doing this week?
Hey, I'm doing great today, Christian. Great to be here. It's really been interesting. I think, I know you and I have been talking a lot these last couple of weeks because we don't have anywhere to go.
No.
And but been doing a lot of stuff with video. In fact, it's kind of fun. I just put a video out on my channels. It was a Zoom hack for people that might want to figure out ways to use Zoom where you can see the whole person and not just the face like we're doing now. But really excited to have Chris on the show this week. Chris and I met a couple weeks ago. I guess it's been more than a couple weeks, but we were actually originally at a Podfest meetup here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And we didn't meet each other then, but then we got a chance to meet each other. Chris is an amazing guy. He's a Podfest consultant, and his company is called Cast Ahead. And we've been talking a lot about doing some collaboration once we can get out of our bunkers.
Fantastic. And the good thing is, because even though you can't be in a physical space with somebody right now, I know Chris has some great tips that he's going to share with viewers today on how they can actually still do that, even though they aren't physically in person. So I'm going to go and bring on Chris, and we're going to kick things off. So Chris, it's fantastic having you on.
Likewise, great to meet you, Christian. And of course, Jim, it's just another day for us having a conversation. So
Right.
I appreciate the opportunity to come on. Here I am in Cast Ahead World Headquarters, or the bunker, as it now will be known. Thanks, Jim, for calling it that. But
Your
yeah, I
bunker looks a
appreciate.
little nicer.
What's that?
I said your bunker looks a little nicer.
Yeah. Well, who knows what else, in the world of live streaming, you don't even know
That's
what
right.
else is around me. I mean, I could be looking at all kinds of junk, but
Yeah.
it certainly is a crazy time. That goes without saying, but I think this week has been actually a busier week than I've experienced in quite some time. And it's
And why
just
is
because obviously the pandemic is happening, and I think it's thrown everybody out of sorts, and they're back in their homes, and they've got their dogs, and their kids are at home, from school. And, I spend a majority of my time working within the podcasting space, and with businesses, with marriage therapists, with motivational speakers and whatnot, and their podcasting strategy. And all of a sudden, you're in a situation where you can't travel to where they are and set up your equipment, or you can't meet at a studio, or all of these things. But you still have to do what you do, and you have to diversify yourself, and you have to move things forward. And what we're seeing in the podcasting space is actually you would assume, with people maybe having a little more free time or a little more ability to do something at home, that they would be listening to more podcasts. And it's actually the opposite. And I think that a lot of that has to do with people may listen to podcasts on their commutes to work. Driving in their car, or walking, or on the subway, or whatever. That's when they're listening to podcasts. They're used to doing that. Well, now there is no commute. Now they're waking up, and they've got the kid tapping them on the head. They've got to feed the dog, and their spouse is like, "Hey, since you're home, I need you to do this, that, and the other." So there's a lot of things going on within that and that responsibility. Not to mention what's happening on the news that's causing people to kind of recoil a little bit. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to turn off the news and get the information that you can trust, whether that's CDC Online or whatever, and move business forward. So what I'm speaking to a lot of clients, and that is to start creating evergreen content that may not be related to COVID-19. You know, the other reason why podcasting is down for, podcasters that have been around for years, their podcasts are down because there's a glut of coronavirus podcasts that have been released. And because that's what everybody's clicking on, that's creating this halo effect on the charts. And so there's a lot of listening that's going on for COVID-19 related podcasts. And quite honestly, I feel like that's if someone's doing that, regardless of how beneficial that podcast may be, it is short-lived. Right. At some point, we're going to get to the other side of this, right? And I think the podcasters, the companies, the businesses that are diversifying and taking this as an opportunity and not necessarily something that would cause them to recoil in fear, to move this thing forward. They're the ones at the other end of this thing that are going to thrive. They're diversifying their business and they're doing things. Jim and I talked, and Jim mentioned this yesterday. He's working with I guess is it a yoga
Pilates studio? Yeah.
Pilates studio. And if you're a Pilates studio, it's about being around people. It's about that community. It's about that. So how do you continue to do that and continue to do business? And so they hire a guy like Jim Fuhs who can say, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a live stream. We're going to have it be interactive. We're going to be able to do these things for you. And that Pilates studio at the end of this thing is going to have additional business because they've decided to diversify this. So I've had a busier time myself. In fact, Jim and I just worked through a hack that I'd love to be able to show your viewers and listeners in terms of how to continue to do a live stream like this and or a podcast, or repurpose a live stream like this into a podcast with high quality audio. And I know you've mentioned before, Christian, on your show, you guys talked about Squadcast.
Yeah. Definitely.
And there has been some enhancements to it, and they're getting a great bit of their business is obviously flourishing during this time as well. But if I could share my screen really quickly, one of the hacks that Jim and I found that we could do is obviously StreamYard, the platform that we're on right now, broadcasting across, YouTube and Facebook, is fantastic. And it allows for someone that knows what they're doing, like you, Christian, doing a really great visual show that people can engage with. And I see all the comments on there. Shout out to Tim and Dan who are chiming in. But I think, if I'm going to talk, and give you the real about StreamYard, if I could, I'm not hired by StreamYard. I definitely, love that platform. But if you want to take the audio from StreamYard, it really has it's got some issues. Number one is if you're someone that does podcasts and mix and edit podcasts like I do a lot, I spend a lot of time doing that, making them sound as good as they can, so that there's no distractions and you get to the content and you get to hear that stuff. The StreamYard audio quality basically takes our voices and mixes them together. And then there's at times where there's warbles and the audio kind of, goes underwater at times. And I think for a live stream, it's fine. It's totally fine. And I think in the live streaming space, people are a little more forgiving, I believe, in terms of, if something goes down or whatever. I mean, we had a thing 10 minutes ago. We didn't know if we were going to be able to do this thing because of the platform, went down, but now it's back up and we're good. So, aren't all you viewers lucky that you get to see us? But the audio that you get back is just not great. So, what we found out that we can do is if you run Squadcast in another browser, you can record high quality audio that you can download after the fact, as a WAV file or an MP3 file, and then pull that audio into your DAW, into your workstation, however you're doing it, individually. Actually, you would assume with that was me. Speaking of an open browser, probably playing YouTube. But that is a huge benefit to someone who wants a good quality podcast. And if you're doing a live stream, you may not want to put in a podcast us talking about what we're seeing and what we're showing, right? If someone's listening to that podcast that they're not in that space, you want to go to their space. But you could have a good 10-minute chunk out of a live stream that you can repurpose and put into a podcast or put into a section of a podcast and be able to repurpose that later. So,
you want me to go and pull up my screen so you can share this hack now, or do you want to put the end show? You let me know.
Yeah, I could show you really quickly for sure.
Okay, so tell viewers, what do we have going on now? So I'm going to pull up your screen, but go ahead and tell them what
yeah, I'm in Squadcast right now, and I've set up a test. So Jim, I sent you the link. I don't know if you've got yourself up and running just yet.
I think I do. Yeah, I do.
So for those of you who haven't tried Squadcast yet, this is here. So I'm talking about how great it is, and I'm getting.
So let's tell viewers, what is Squadcast?
Squadcast is a online virtual podcast recording space. So generally here you set up a session, you can time it, you can send out a link to all of your guests. So if you are a podcast producer or you host a podcast and you have a guest and they live in India and you are in Lawrenceville, Georgia, you can set this up. In terms of time zones and all of that, you can feel free to just kind of set it up in your time zone. It will send it to whoever in their particular time zone. You set up a session, and let's hope that this works now.
Bear in mind,
I'm sorry?
I was saying, bear in mind, everyone, sometimes just with everybody using the internet at the moment, a lot of sites have scaled back on, had to scale back on the quality, and what else they allow. So here we go.
So here's where you can make sure that you've got the correct settings. If you have a different mic than and I've got just a Samson Q2U microphone. I'm using the same microphone as I am on your show right now, Christian and Jim. And then of course I've got my headphones. Always wear headphones in situations like this, or you're going to get that latency echo. And then you just click, and then you can see the meter on the right, just making sure that you don't have your gain hiked up too high and you're not in the red. You join your session.
Okay.
And Jim Fuhs should be showing up on the right side. Maybe your camera is not allowing you to show it.
I turned it off because I wasn't sure if you wanted to actually record with the camera or not.
So you hear the latency in Jim's voice, because So in theory, what's going to happen here is he's got his other camera off, but the person that you're joining with, this is the green room. This is the backstage, similar to what you see in StreamYard. However, there's Jim. All right. This is very meta for me right now with all of these screens and multiple views of my face. But in any event, the cool thing here is you can double check your settings, your sound, your video settings if you need to. It also tells you whether or not you're on the strength of your network. And then I can over here and I can just make sure. So if you're dealing with someone that may not be technically savvy or whatever, you can go over and make sure that they have the right settings, or I can't hear you, I can't see you. You can work through that visually with that person and virtually with that person. And then it's just a matter of going down here and hitting record. And right now what we're doing is I'm recording. I'm obviously on StreamYard on your show, but it's also recording my audio as well up to the Squadcast cloud. And, if Jim were to speak at any point in time, Jim, if you could, please speak.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. I can hear you with a little weird latency, although that latency won't show up on the Squadcast recording. So then I hit stop, and you can see right here, it immediately uploads to the cloud, and I can download it, the individual recordings of myself and Jim. leads from this. Those are available and will sit there no matter what. I don't have to go get them now. There's no worries there. I can back out and be able to download it. So, this sort of hack, if you will, is mostly, I feel like the best way to repurpose a live stream into a podcast. Right. Okay. Everything that we talk about on a live stream is probably not for a podcast. If you just wanted to do a really quick and dirty, put it together, we hear a lot of podcasts. Sometimes Rogan goes there. Sometimes Your Mom's House or something like that. These are big comedy podcasts. A lot of them will they just take whatever their video show is and put it into a podcast, and you'll be listening and they'll be talking about looking at something and you just can't identify, right? You just can't. It's, so what I like to do is take the audio that's recorded in Squadcast from a live stream and, take a chunk of it and repurpose that. So it's another way, I think, virtually for, companies, small businesses, podcasters to continue to record content, to continue to do things in the midst of social distancing and quarantine and everything that's going on right now.
Good points. Good points. So for those of you who have not yet checked out Squadcast, I dropped a link to that in the comments. We also talked about Squadcast back on episode 189. That was almost a year ago that we talked about this tool as well. But Chris, thanks for sharing that tool with everyone. It's definitely something that they should check out. It's a very useful tool, especially if you're having to work remotely. It doesn't mean you have to stop doing your recordings. You can do all of them utilizing the Squadcast platform. So, Jim, where do we want to go from here, by the way? We're going to bring Chris. We're going to talk, I know, more later on about live video and podcasting and audio. Jim, where do we want to go next?
Well, let's talk about LinkedIn, because you know how that's one of my favorite platforms to be on, since they've been kind enough to give me LinkedIn Live access. Yeah. And they're talking about conversation ads.
So what are conversation ads?
So conversation ads are going to actually allow you to really start using, in a sense, it's similar to what I think Facebook's done with messenger marketing, is you can start to actually have a conversation within messaging within LinkedIn. I find it interesting. I will say that one thing about LinkedIn ads can be very effective because it's still not being used by a lot of people.
Right.
However, they are more expensive than what you would see with Facebook ads. But I have seen, because I have helped a couple companies with this, that you can get very, very targeted and you can really get some great results. My only issue in general with messenger ads overall is I tend to find that it's too much of a sales pitch. And I'm not asking you to come into my inbox and start selling me something, and it tends to turn me off. So yes, it might work for some people if you're connected to the company and you're wanting to talk about a special, but for me personally, I'm not necessarily a fan of that. What do you think, Chris?
Well, it's kind of like a cold call, isn't it?
Right. Now, Dan Jordan would like that.
Right. It feels I have to admit it does feel a bit invasive, but the more I think about it, I think it's just because we're not used to it, and all of a sudden it's happening.
Right.
I think I like the idea of looking at this and then finding a creative way, understanding who's receiving it, understanding who your potential customer is, understanding that, and if they do feel invasive, how do you make them feel that like they'd be open to that conversation, or they'd be open to what you're having to say. So I think it's you have to find a creative way to put it out there, similar to the conversation that you, Jim, and Tim had regarding bots. I think you just have to find a creative way, to who's receiving it. There's going to be some it's just not for some. Some are going to look at it and spam you out, right? But I think this is you have to look at it as a creative way and incorporate it to what you're doing.
And I would almost say probably the best way to look at it, when I look at, if you want to call it the ads funnel, they're really it's awareness, engagement, conversion, right? And so maybe you start the conversation is more about making people aware of your business and not trying to go straight to the conversion sale. And I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes with ads in general. It's like you got to build a little bit of that know, like, and trust. And that's where I equate know is the awareness ads, like is the engagement ads, and then trust is the conversion. And I think too many people try to go straight to conversion. And so I think, to your point, you got to have a strategy of like, okay, why do you want to go into people's inboxes and what are you going to say?
Yeah, I think awareness is a part of it, but I think you're already making yourself aware by showing up in a way. So I almost feel like the first instinct is to be is to understand what the needs are of the people you're sending it to, and give them almost show them your solution off the top, because I think that speaks to them, right? Because if you show up talking about yourself, I think that's where you lose customers. You're already showing up. They already see your name or your company logo or whatever you're sending. I feel like the right hook, if you will, or the right way to present yourself is to know who you're sending it to and to be presenting some sort of solution to whatever their problem is.
Definitely, and the other problem with the conversational ads, I mean, they're great, except for the fact that I think a lot of people, like you all have been talking about, they basically just jump right into that sales pitch. They don't actually spend enough time working it, and this is where, like, I wish Phil Gerbyshak, my normal co-host, I wish he would come on sometime. We're trying to get him back on, but like, I want to hear his thoughts as well on the conversational ads piece, because people, they immediately jump right to try to make that sale. And it's like, you can't rush the sale. And especially right now, that's also very important, because a lot of people are, a lot of people are having tough times at the moment, given all that's going on, and people are immediately trying to jump to that sale. And you have to be very careful, I think, with how you use these, because if you overuse them, you're going to quickly turn off your audience. So the good thing about this, and I actually think this would be worth joining, but LinkedIn actually has a webinar as well on this on April 9th at 11 a.m. Standard Time. That's 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And they're going to talk about some different strategies to turn the conversations into conversions. So I dropped a link to that in the chat, but that's something I think people should definitely check out to see, a little more about the conversation ads, but also see if there's good examples that they give that you can utilize. Because that is the one thing about LinkedIn ads. There's not a lot of people using them because they're very expensive typically. So this would be a good way for you to learn as a business how you can leverage them. So any last thoughts on LinkedIn conversation ads before we move into the next topic?
No, I'm curious on the functionality of it. If you guys know, are you auto populating based on how people are answering, or once someone starts answering, you're in a chat with them live?
I don't know that yet. That's a good question.
Is it? I mean, in other words, does it operate more like a Facebook Messenger bot, or is this more of a, like, once these are sent and somebody starts responding to them, they're popping up in your?
They're going to probably function, where they're going to probably pop up. But, from what I can see in their examples they have here, I mean, they've got case studies that are plugged in. They've got somebody can, do a tell me more option. They've got another one they can sign up, learn more. I would expect that LinkedIn was actually reading these just like they do with your regular messages and try to give you an auto-populated solution based on what's actually in the thread. But it was a bit closer, I think, to the ads. It basically is adding essentially a button, if you really think about it, in your actual LinkedIn messages.
So similar to InMail, really, where when someone sends you an InMail, you get a response.
So, okay. So we're going to move on from LinkedIn conversation ads. Jem, what's next, by the way, on the menu for today?
Do you want to talk about the Instagram? I guess it's community conversations, or what are they calling it?
Yeah, they're calling it Instagram CoWatching. And, obviously this is coming about because of, obviously what's going on with like COVID-19 and whatnot. But basically they're rolling out this new feature. It's a co-watching feature, and it's obviously an apt time to do this because, with more and more people not being able to get together, you need to have video conferencing type solutions. So they're doing this co-watching feature. Have you had a chance to try this, Jim? See if you have it and whatnot.
I have not tried yet. It's something, in fact, it's funny, right? It reminds me of when I've lived in hurricane areas, right? All of a sudden people are trying to figure out how are we all going to communicate, and people throw out all kinds of, grandiose ideas. And the last time I was in a big hurricane, I said, why don't you just use Twitter? Why do you got to come up with all these new things? Oh, download this thing you've never used that no one else is going to use, because everybody thinks somehow you can communicate without the internet. So I kind of laugh at that. But I think this is an example of where there's a lot of people, as an example, the company that in some aspects has benefited the most from what's going on has probably been Zoom. The number of Zoom users has skyrocketed. Because now people are doing things like, hey, let's have a Zoom party and everybody get together, and we're all, sharing what's going on in our lives, and it's allowing people to connect. And I think in some ways people feel safe because they're in a closed loop environment. They're not on a social platform. They're basically, unless the host is recording it, when it's over, it's gone. And so I think this is that attempt of like, hey, we're losing people because instead of hanging out on Instagram, they're going to go hang out on Zoom. And so I think, even though I think the statistics are showing higher usage of the platforms, but kind of to Chris's point about podcast being down, is it because right now we're spending more time in front of our computer screens, our television screens, and not necessarily listening to audio as much because of distractions. And I think Instagram's like, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? But then again, right? Am I going to get on my phone and hang out with a bunch of people when I can hang out right here comfortably in my chair with my webcam and talk on Zoom? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think when people look at this, I want to be considerate to everyone. This is obviously a very serious thing that's going on right now in our world. But I think when you pull yourself outside of that and you're doing what's safe and responsible, and you can look at this as an opportunity. And I think a lot of companies are doing just that. And I was just on a live stream last night with Podfest, and we were talking about this very thing. And I said, you know what's great about this is that all of the tech that's going to be launched after the fact, because right now companies are realizing they need all of these things that people were not vocal about. And this thing happened, and all of a sudden it's like, we need to add this element. We need to add this element. Instagram already, this thing that we're talking about here is, that's Instagram doing this. They know what they're doing. They absolutely know what they're doing. And I'm sure it's going to probably crash because everyone's going to jump all over it. Now, maybe it's not, but I don't want to downplay it already. But it's just imagine what great things are going to come out of it. Like, listen, we talked about Zoom, and Zoom has its benefits, and it's great for some things. It's not great for others. And so StreamYard is great for some things. It's not great for others. And so I think what's going to happen is that whole rising tide, raising the ships, or whatever the quote is. This is going to create, more diversity, more competition for these companies, and it's going to make our lives greater because we're going to have all of this great stuff that's going to be launched, and Zoom's going to, make their thing better. Hopefully, their audio. I'm sorry, out loud voice. StreamYard is and the companies like StreamYard and companies like some of these others that are smaller. They like to hear from their users, and they're nimble enough to make those changes and to update their stuff based on what they consider a priority. So that's another thing is when these things are going on, we have a direct line to these people to be able to say, you need to be doing this, this, and this, and this, and they do it. So it's really kind of, I look at it as an opportunity for a lot of companies.
Absolutely.
So basically, I mean, this feature, this new Instagram, they call it Instagram co-watching, but basically it's a media sharing feature. It's going to let you it's kind of interesting. It's actually going to let you view Instagram posts together with your friends over video chat according to Instagram. And you basically, according to Instagram, you just start a video by tapping the video chat icon in the direct inbox or in an existing Instagram direct thread. So that's the private messaging side. And then you'll be able to view saved, liked, and suggested videos and photos by tapping the photo icon and an ongoing video chat. So pretty cool, pretty neat. They did that to some other features like, stay-at-home stickers and things like that. But in order to get this, I definitely would say, hey, make sure you go and update your Instagram app from your device's app store and then start using it. So
I can see this creating a lot of virtual online communities. And that's really, and I think when people start shutting off the news, they're going to start, try to find out to get that energy that they used to have when they were doing face-to-face hangouts. They'll be looking for these kinds of things, and it'll be creating more communities. It's just, it's a good thing for sure.
And I think you hit on a really key point, Chris, that if I'm a company that is in this space, that's what you want to figure out. How can I make community together where, like right now, the three of us are all, having a conversation. We're able to see comments of people that aren't in the conversation. And, to me, there's kind of this pro and con of sometimes people, like as an example, with StreamYard, you can have up to 6 people on screen and 4 people in the green room. But at some point, and that's like with Zoom, right? You can have 100 people. I think it's 50 on screen in a gallery view. But it's like, how do you keep track of everything that's going on? So I think there's kind of a fine point of, where too many people on the screen is too many people on the screen. And to me, that's the one thing that, I don't know what the answer is, but I think, especially because a lot of people like to do things on their phone as opposed to a computer.
Right.
I think that's going to be the person that can figure that out is going to do quite well for themselves.
Definitely. And, I'd say overall, I mean, you have to pick the tool that works best for you. If, for example, if your audience is, say you're all iPhone users, for example, and you want to have a quick communication with somebody, a quick chat, utilize FaceTime, for example. If you want to have, a whole bunch of people on and you want to do a mass training, Zoom is a good option there. You have to then also look at the audience because, for example, FaceTime, you can do 32 people at once on one of the new on the new version of that. And for some people, they might, need to have to install software, for example, to run Zoom. That might be complicated for them. So you really have to pick your poison based on who your audience is that you are communicating with. So anything else you want to add on this new Instagram co-watching feature?
I'm waiting for those invites. I haven't got any yet.
Okay, Jim. So where are we going next?
So let's talk about something that's happening not only with this company, but we're hearing about a lot with the sudden demand on networks. But YouTube is actually doing something with their streaming right now, and they're going to SD quality worldwide because of the bandwidth surge. Because everybody's on YouTube now. Because
wait, so we're blurry right now on everyone's screen? Oh man.
We're at 720 instead.
We're not in high def? What a bummer. I'm kidding.
Christian
didn't think that was that funny.
No. I was actually I was thinking about this earlier. So, Jem, what do we got going on? So, okay, YouTube's downgrading. What is this going to mean for our business?
I really don't think it's as big a deal as some people may put it up to, because a lot of times you're not watching stuff in 1080 or better anyway. And so I think it's just kind of this, it's this, this downgrade is really to just make it easier for the network to work. So you don't have crashes, because there's definitely been a surge, and I don't know how long it's going to take them to, it's kind of one of those, if you build it, they will come, right? So if this is causing a strain, I mean, Facebook is apparently doing some of this. Netflix is doing this in Europe, where they're throttling the stream capabilities and things of that nature. So it's like, if they build out the ability to handle this surge, will they still need it when this is all over? So I think it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, and so the other part to this, though, is that they are defaulting to standard definition quality for the next month. It's not saying, hey, you know what, you're not allowed to broadcast in a different quality. They're giving you a default of SD. So you can always go in and change that. That's the thing I think you need to keep in mind with overall.
Right. And Dan Jordan says we're not blurry. We just look like we're running really fast.
By the way, Dan, I like your icon you've got on your YouTube channel. Looks fantastic. Thanks a lot for joining us, by the way, this week. So yeah, so anything you want to add about this? Like what should a business do? Should they just keep producing content, at the highest quality, or should they reduce the quality of their content and upload, SD quality? What do you guys think?
I think you continue to do high quality. I think if companies are too reliant on those that own the pipes, and then it just becomes you're doing extra things that are unnecessary in my opinion. You have to make your business right and utilize the pipes, and certainly if there's a change like this, you have to consider what you're going to do. But I don't think that uploading things in standard definition or promoting things in standard definition at this point and then later going to HD. Personally, I don't see an advantage to that.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, it almost becomes one of those. Will be interesting is people don't realize this has happened, and they're like, "Oh, why doesn't my video look good?" It's like, well, this is where you got to have someone on your team that understands what you're doing, so that they can say, "Hey, this is default. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way. We can go back to the way we're doing it." But it's forcing you to have to go in and actually be aware of that, as opposed to a lot of times people aren't paying attention. So I think, this kind of goes back to one of my favorite military things of attention to detail.
And this is something that it's not changing it completely. It's just changing it so that people aren't starting out at HD or higher quality. They're starting out at lower quality. You can always go up if you potentially need to. Chances are, here's the thing. I don't see this as a big deal. I think if I'm a business, I publish the content at the highest quality that I can. And I anticipate that, I want to make sure that I make the best quality content. It doesn't mean that people have to watch it at that quality. It's really up to them, and for the most part, I think people they're not going to really know the difference. I mean, SD quality on YouTube is actually still really good for most people, especially if you're watching on a mobile device. So anything else I want to add about the fact that YouTube is downgrading quality SD across worldwide, at least for the next month?
I just think it's something that, people have to be aware of and just be prepared. If you're producing content, make sure that you've got your setup, that you're doing it at the highest or the level that you've normally done it at. I won't say you need to try to go ultra if that's not what you've done. I think it's to Chris's point, what is your standard? Stay at your standard, and don't feel like you have to lower your standards.
Very cool. So now what we're going to do is we've got more topics that we want to discuss, but they're also not they're not big topics for the week. They're things such as, the fact that you can now edit tweets utilizing a third-party tool. There's Pinterest Today, which is, the ability to help identify or help source content on Pinterest and also identify trending topics. Also a couple of updates this week from Facebook. They're testing out a new redesign, from dark mode to this new redesign. But if you want to get those, we're gonna put those in the blog post, socialchefs.com/daily. That way you can get those. But hey, you know what? We want to make sure we cover the most important topics, and obviously make sure we give Chris some time here as well to talk about live streaming, audio, and podcasting. So what we're going to do here is we're going to transition over to the next part of the show, and that's where we're going to ask Chris a couple of questions and have him, give you all some tips on, as I mentioned, live streaming audio and podcasting audio. So, Chris, I know we talked beforehand, about utilizing Squadcast, but I've got a couple of questions for you. One of those, and just feel free to give people just some quick bullets to help them. But one question we want to talk about is, if I'm a business, how can I utilize podcasting with my business?
Yeah. So I think generally when people see the headlines for podcasting, and you're a business and you know or have thought about developing a podcast strategy for whatever business it is. It could be anything from your dentist practice to, like some sort of niche small business to, a full-scale digital marketing business. And you read the headlines and you'll see the headline that says, Apple Podcasts about to reach 1 million podcasts. And you see that and you go, wow. And you start to, see these headlines about, Joe Rogan Experience and all these people making that podcast money and that whole thing sort of ramping up. And so you think, well, I might be too late, or mine's not going to be as good, or maybe the time for me to do this was a couple of years ago. At this point, I'm going to spend my time and invest in my company in these other areas. I argue that it is now the perfect time to start a podcast, to start a good podcast, and that means not a podcast that you sign up for with a free hosting provider that will not be mentioned on the show, but something to where you pay for a host or work with someone like myself, who's a podcast consultant and works with companies to develop these things, because out of the now 925,000 podcasts that are sitting on Apple Podcasts right now, only about a quarter of them are active, meaning they post content at least in the past 90 days. And that is 240,000, not competitors, but 240,000, out there. If you were to compare that to how many websites there are billions of websites, and everybody's got a website, right? So everyone's focusing on their website when you should be focusing on something where you can set yourself apart and your customer can hear your voice. They're selecting you. It's a completely different type of thing. They're not being pushed. They're selecting you to listen to you in a completely different space than, potentially in front of a screen. YouTube channel. Tons of people have YouTube channels. There is, I think the stat that I saw is that there is one podcast for every 92 YouTube channels.
Wow.
So I look at this as an opportunity for people, especially actually in a niche business. I spoke to someone a few weeks ago about developing a podcast on cake decorating. And that is such a visual thing, right? Well, she's focusing all of her efforts on a YouTube channel. I haven't done a search, but my guess is there's not very many cake decorating podcasts. You can come up with a creative title, a creative conversation as a podcast to set yourself apart from your competition and do what they're not doing. So I think right now is actually the perfect time to do a podcast, a good podcast. I always want to qualify that. And say, because, it is true, anyone can do a podcast. If you've got a mic and a mouth and a computer, a way to record it, you can do a podcast. But if you want to do a good podcast and you do 100 other things in your company and you may not do this one well, I always am a fan of saying, I'm going to invest in this part of my business and I'm going to hire an expert like Jim Fuhs, or I'm going to hire an expert like Christian, or I'm going to hire an expert like this to handle my social media. I'm going to handle a person that's going to handle my podcast strategy. So I'm a huge proponent of not looking at these headlines, these news, these things to get you to click onto things, and actually look at the data and look at it as an opportunity to do a podcast.
Good points. Good points.
I think that answered the question. Did I?
Yes.
Okay.
You did. You did.
I definitely think so. So, Jen, what's the second question we had for him?
Yeah. So, Chris, you showed us Squadcast earlier. What are some other ways that podcasters and live streamers can improve their audio? Because I know one thing we didn't talk about, Chris has worked with Sony. So I know he's like a big audio. Is audiophile the right word?
Yeah.
So
I don't. Go ahead.
By the way, yes. The one over your right shoulder. Yes.
Oh yeah, that is. That's a Maroon 5.
Nice. Very nice.
I was going to say Dave Matthews, but that one's over there. So, yeah. Here's the other thing too: is I am absolutely someone who hears the little nuances and the things like, ooh, that the upper mids of that voice need to, but those are things that 99.7% of people don't notice. Mm-hmm. So I'm also a person that's trying to get away from that perfectionism, and the acronym that Craig Rochelle uses is GETMO, which is good enough to move on. And so I think you don't have to listen, no one, when you ask someone what their favorite podcast is, and they'll name like maybe their 3 podcasts, not a single person will say, you know what I really love most about that podcast? It just sounds so awesome. They don't do that. No. So your job as a podcast editor, in terms of the sonic value, is to make sure that no one else hears anything but the person speaking. Person speaking at any one given time, because their content is, and so if they're saying and like a lot, and you want to have that conversation with the host and get them, or the best thing that I could tell anyone that's maybe just starting out in podcasting is the best thing you need to worry about in terms of audio is right here at the source, is knowing how to speak into a microphone properly. Because mm-hmm. if you have a great, source recording that is not going too loud, that's not too quiet, that's in a small dead room with some carpet, and you're speaking into a mic that's not too close and doing like this, and you're not too far away and getting all these kind of room noises, or you don't have tapping on the table or anything like that, you're speaking across the mic and not into the mic. You speak into the mic, then all that air that you're pushing out with your plosives gets picked up and creates all of this clipping. That, if you can learn how to do that well, and the beauty of podcasting is you can practice. You can plug this into your computer and hit record and practice till you get to where your voice sounds really good, and eventually you'll get into a natural spot to where you can record it. Once you get that, there's a few little tricks that you can do in terms of processing on the back end. Right. To make it sound congruent, and to make sure that it's properly aligned with other podcasts on Apple Podcasts. If anyone's listened to a podcast and it's too quiet and they have to crank it up all the way in order to hear it, and then you get a phone call or you get a text, and that text sounds like it's just about to explode in the middle of your head or whatever, it's because you have to make sure your podcast is at the proper loudness level. It has, that adaptive leveling to, and all of those things are because the important thing is, like I said, is to make sure that your listener is focused on the person speaking. It's not, all of the sheen and all of those other things, the music and all of that stuff is, it's important to sound professional and to sound like you're professionally produced and all of those things to some people. And we do that for sure. But in the end, this is a mono recording that someone is, listening to potentially on that little speaker that comes out of their phone. They may not even be listening to it on their headphones. So it really is just about making sure that you are focused on, the source recording first and foremost, and then the bells and whistles and everything can happen after the fact. So if you want to, if you could share my screen really quickly, I'll show another kind of quick thing to add to that. This is Auphonic. And this, you get 2 hours of free time to do this. And this is a good sort of post mastering hack. So once you've created your podcast, either solo voice or whatever, and you have you've mixed it in your DAW. And by the way, I saw a question from Dan about what a DAW is. DAW, for those of you who don't know, is an acronym. It's DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. I'm sorry, every once in a while I just fall into that tech talk. And anyway, so it's however you're doing it. If it's GarageBand, if it's Audacity, or however you're mixing your audio. Auphonic, what they allow you to do is you basically choose your file. Usually it's an MP3 file that you have. You upload it to here.
Okay.
The only thing you really need to worry about here is making sure that you have this set to -16 LUFS. That's going to make sure that if your podcast is too loud or too quiet, that it's going to make sure that it's in the proper level. There's adaptive leveling. So, if Christian and Jim were on a podcast and Christian's voice was louder than Jim's, and it basically kind of washes that over. It doesn't. It would be the equivalent of if someone were sitting behind the board and writing up the faders on your voices, generally. Then you have normalization, filtering. This noise and hum reduction does a pretty good job of eliminating something. If you're maybe doing a podcast in a car or something like that, it does a pretty good job of doing that. But generally, these are just plugins. And then if you start production, you're going to sit and wait, and it's going to process, and it's going to download on the back end. And if you can A/B those two files, you hear a fantastic difference of what it can do. It's just I do this on every single one of my podcasts because I want to be sure, no matter how I'm mixing it in Logic Pro X, which is my workstation, that I've got that, those LUFs at the right level. But inevitably, there's something I miss, and this is going to fix it on the back end. It's just making it, not perfect, but it makes it proper and sets it so that if someone's listening to Joe Rogan Experience and then they're listening to a podcast that that I'm working with, it's in the same, sonically in the same range. So
fantastic. So we had a third question. Yeah, or go ahead, Jim.
No, you go ahead. You got it.
So yeah, we've got another third question for you. And by the way, normally we have a separate tool time segment. So we're talking about these tools actually outside of that, which is totally fine. So what we'll do is we'll make sure we put these into the blog post recap as well, along with Chris's notes.
Yeah, I apologize if we took us off agenda there, Christian.
Oh, no worries at all. I just want to make sure I clarify for our viewers. So the third question we had for you, is what are the challenges that new podcasters face, and how do you work with them to launch? And this would be back to somebody who's just starting a podcast. You just give us a situation.
Yeah, I feel like as a podcast consultant, you wear a number of hats, and one of them is therapist in a lot of ways. And I think when you talk to someone and they say, well, one of their first things they will say is, well, I just haven't had the time. And that's usually the first thing that someone says to me when I talk to them, and maybe they've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on for this particular business. I spoke to a comedian, and she had a live streaming strategy. She had, there was a book, there was just all kinds of stuff. And I asked her, I said, so where can I get your podcast? What's the name of your podcast? And she said, I don't have one. And I was like, well, why not? And she started talking about all of these other things she had going on. I said, no, you definitely have time for it. There's something else. There's something else that's preventing you from doing a podcast. What is it? And inevitably, it's not the time. It's inevitably, there's things like imposter syndrome, right? There's things like perfectionism. I just talked about my own perfectionism. And so especially for someone, that's been in multiple different areas of businesses, they want to be sure that when they launch a podcast, it's awesome right out of the gate, man. It's, and you're going to be top 10 in the iTunes charts, and that's the wrong attitude to have, because everyone's first podcast, when they go back and listen to it after episode 100, to them sucks. Right? You just have to go and you have to do it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And so I think that's really what I do mostly in terms of new podcasters is get them out of the starting blocks and get them down the lane, and just, like I said before, from an equipment perspective, if you're not a tech person, it's really not that hard to consult and train someone on how to do proper mic technique, to use equipment that they, can do either themselves, that I can work with them on, and they can do that, or they have me do it. And so once you get that stuff out of the way, all of a sudden they've got time for it. And as a consultant, and if as either one of when you're in a consultancy business, what you're selling is time. And that's exactly, and there's nothing more valuable to someone than that. And I think that's really what it's about. And how, when I deal with new podcasters, is go, tell me, let's get to the root of this, and let's talk about how we can work and do a creative podcast, and let's pull down those walls, and let's get you in front of a mic, and let's just start this thing.
Definitely 100% agree with that. So okay, so you have another tool pulled up. So we've talked about I'm going to recap these real quick. We talked about Squadcast. So Squadcast is for being able to basically record a podcast without being in the same location. So for example, they're not both on the same mixer. They're doing it all via web browser, but I don't think there's any add-ons or anything that have to be installed. So we've got Squadcast. We talked about Auphonic. Auphonic basically is a tool for doing some of that post-production behind the scenes, helping you clean up the podcast, right?
Right.
And then what's the third one you have pulled up here?
This is just showing you Audacity, and I think we had spoken, and this is the program that's been around for a while. It's free.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it works. It does have its limitations, right? It is free. However, I encourage people who are just starting out to learn this. On my site, I have a Audacity 101, sort of how to get started with one or two people on doing this. This is free. I suggest at the very least, you set this up and record your own voice and listen back to it, critique yourself. This is great for practice and whatnot, but it's also fine to do a podcast, and then you can take that audio and do whatever. It has plugins, it has whatever. And so if you record a podcast here, then and you have less than 2 hours a month, you upload it to Auphonic, and all of a sudden you've got a good sounding podcast. So that's Audacity. And then just one other thing, and I know this has been around a while, but this is sort of going back to the conversation where we had, people are, during the COVID-19 pandemic, everyone's sort of back in their houses and maybe not recording as many podcasts, and how do we come up with ideas for content if we can't be in the same room, and Squadcast is one way to record those things. But I think another way to do it is to encourage companies and podcasters to create best of episodes. It's a good way to mine your catalog content and to pull out thematic things and prop those podcasts up as new content. So if you're pulling a 5-minute excerpt out of episode 189 and you've got that, then you're referring to it on that podcast, and people are going, and if you want to go and listen to it, here's the link in the show notes, and people are going back, and all of a sudden you're getting some listens to the full episode. That's another way to do it. Another way to generate content during this time for podcasters is to use a thing called Speakpipe. So this has been around for a while, and you basically you create your own. It creates a website for you where anyone can record on mobile or desktop a voicemail, really, for you, if you will. And you have control over how long the recording is. You pay an increment, gigabytes and increments for Speakpipe. So how we're using this with podcasters is you'll pick a topic, and it might be, in this case, I work with Dan Jordan, the sales energizer, and he's in the sales field, right? Motivational speaker and coach as well. So if we're going to come up with a topic for an episode, and it may be, the greatest sales war stories, because old sales reps, they love to talk about their war stories or something like that. What we'll do is we'll start to go to these to not just key sales leaders that are contacts of Dan. And if you send them this link and say, hey, we'd love to feature you on my episode of, key sales war stories. If you could just, click the link here and give me a 3-minute, story of what your favorite sales war story is. Of course, we'll promote your, brand, your company, like whatever, on the podcast. Send it out to a bunch of people. Go to Facebook group admins, right? You've got these people, they're considered, sales leaders and whatever, or whatever business you're reaching out to, they're considered leaders in that particular business, and solicit a bunch of people to record. And all of a sudden you get back, 5 or 6 3-minute things that is a compilation of, key leaders in that particular business. And you have a wonderful podcast episode where you're talking about this, you're going to that particular guest, and then you're talking about that afterwards. And all of a sudden, it could be an hour long or more podcast, and you haven't left your house. So This is just another sort of, I guess, a hack for podcasters and businesses.
And I like how you say like it's like recording a voicemail, because like we use it, and I know Jim and I are using it for a project we're working on. It's a live video summit called Launch Your .live. We're working on that, and we're going to actually utilize that to field questions from the field as well. So people that have questions on video, for example, they can submit those to us. But
perfect.
It's a fantastic, absolutely fantastic tool as well. I will say this: I like the fact that you've given people basically a very nice package for being able to produce a podcast and helping them get those roadblocks out of the way. As you mentioned, I mean, the fact that you don't have to be in the same location and you can still get really good quality audio, thanks to Squadcast, for example. That's a big game changer to me. I mean, a lot of people, they make excuses about why they can't start a podcast. And I love podcasts. I personally think that like people are underutilizing them in their business. And I like the example you gave, by the way, about the cake decorator. That was pretty cool too. Having a podcast about decorating cakes. And, that's a fantastic way to make sure you're reaching your audience. And you could publish them you could publish them during, maybe their commute home, or maybe in the morning. So
exactly.
About, hey, I want to start making some cakes, in the evening. So now they're thinking throughout the day, they're like, oh, I was really excited about that episode on, how to do fondant or something, on a cake. So I think it's a fantastic idea. By the way, so Jim, anything you want to add about, the Christmas?
I'll just say it's been really, a lot of fun. I mean, it kind of goes back to the power of networking and events, how Chris and I have started to get to know each other, and just all the stuff that he knows. And, even yesterday we were, like he said, he created a hack and I created a hack, as well on Zoom. And, we've been thinking about even my wife is a court reporter. How can these remote, attorneys and court reporters all get this? Because audio is probably the most important thing for that reporter.
Yeah.
What tools are out there? Because I don't think a lot of them are prepared for how long this stuff is going on. And Chris is a perfect person to kind of help come up with that solution.
Definitely. So Chris, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap the show up, but what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they have any questions about anything? I know we're gonna put the questions and a couple of bullets along with each one in the blog post, but what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can contact me at castahead.net.
Okay.
It is, that's right. It is .net. So, that person sitting on the .com, you can continue to sit on that .com. I ain't paying you. So castahead.net is the site. That's where all my contact information is. Phone number. I pick up my phone. I answer my emails when you contact me. I love to, that's the other crazy part about this time is, everybody's at home and you start calling people. Guess what? They're picking up their phone. If they're in their offices, they're in, potentially in meetings or whatever. And so this is a great time to be calling people for sure. And I would say castahead.net is the spot. And I would be remiss if I did not promote later on today, not in competition with you guys, the social chefs. If you could just do me a favor and pop up my screen share. I'm doing a live stream with Dan Jordan. That is today at 4 p.m. And this is an ex-con's secrets to earning more money and staying out of jail with Kevin Foster. And he's got a great story. And I'm super excited about being able to be a part of this with Dan and Kevin later today. So.
And I plan to tune in, so I know Dan always gives you a laugh. You've got to watch it. Dan, I would almost say you should call it like Dan Unfiltered, but that's okay.
Hey, we may change while we can, but yeah. Christian and Jim, I appreciate it so much. Thank you guys. I know we probably, may have gone over time. I hope this has been beneficial to your viewers, and I'm honored you brought me on.
No, I'm actually I'm glad we did bring you on, because was telling Jem, I was like, hey, you know what? He really, he knows the stuff about podcasting, and improving the audio quality. And that's the key thing. I mean, you want to make sure your audio sounds great because, as you probably know, I mean, audio is the most important part beyond the quality of your video stream.
Yes.
So make sure you put the time into that. Just a couple quick notes for viewers. We're going to have a blog post recap available this weekend at socialchefs.com/SC234. There's also an Alexa flash briefing and a podcast version of this as well. Now, in addition to that, we'll make sure we include all of Chris's tools and recommendations that he has included, that he's talked about this week. And for those of you who want to tune in next week, we're going to be joined next Thursday. That's April 2nd already. I think it's at 1 o'clock, I think, Jem, with Lisa Patrick on Facebook.com/social chefs and YouTube.com/social chefs. So we hope to see you there. And thanks a lot for tuning in this week. We will see you all later on. Bye, everyone.